Think back for a moment to some of the most impactful conversations you have ever had. Where were you at the time? Who were you speaking with? And most importantly, what were you talking about? For some of us, we may find it difficult to think of recent conversations beyond sports and the weather to the type of interactions that changed our outlook on life. For others, we can vividly recall a recent conversation on a meaningful subject, but not because we benefited from it, but because we walked away feeling outsmarted, belittled, or judged. Now, whichever situation you find yourself in, I'm glad that we can spend the next few minutes together talking about how to talk about controversial subjects. Things like politics, religion, and death, arguably the most important subjects to be discussed, are the ones we tend to speak the least about, right? I have noticed that in both college and life, conversation tends toward the trivial. We can have lengthy discussions and even develop friendships with people without getting to know how they feel about life and society's most impactful topics. We are taught to run away from controversy, to find social safe zones, and to believe that if we're not agreeing with everything everyone is saying, then somehow that makes us judgmental, racist, sexist, or a bigot. Understand that in most cases, a uniformity of opinion does not equate to harmony or peace, but rather to indoctrination or laziness. And if we wish to grow, both individually and as a society, the fear of expressing and assessing one another's views must be ended. Now, our conversation here today will not address any one specific political or social issue. No, the goal of the next few minutes is to encourage you to talk and to recognize differences in opinion and to get excited about those, not try and minimize them. To accomplish this, we'll address 3 simple methods to help you more effectively communicate so that you can respectfully disagree. I could spend our entire time together talking about why controversial subjects, why disagreeing with one another is so vitally important to our society. But there are other talks that discuss that, and I really want to focus in on the how for today. So in regards to the why, let it suffice to reference the words of the American philosopher Eric Hoffer when he said that the beginning of thought is in disagreement, not only with others, but also with ourselves. You see, disagreement is a sign of life. It means that you're thinking, and it helps us to understand and have confidence in who we are, what motivates us, and how we can find meaningful work when we are able to clearly articulate and define the causes and beliefs for which we are able to take a stand for. So, having said that, let's jump right in order to more effectively communicate so that you can respectfully disagree. The first thing we must understand is that it requires a shift in mindset. If you walk away from today with one concept, please remember this. That debates, that meaningful conversation, it should be more like a classroom than a courtroom. More like a classroom than a courtroom. What do I mean by that? When you're discussing a potentially controversial subject, let the other person be the teacher of their view and you be the student, not the cross-examiner. And only once they are completely finished do the roles reverse. Now, you may be thinking, I already know that if I start to talk about a controversial subject with that certain someone, they won't let the roles reverse, right? They're just going to ramble on and on about their view and never let me get my 2 cents in. So really, it's kind of pointless to talk about a meaningful subject with them, right? Well, I would disagree, because I believe that you can teach someone more by asking them good questions than you can by telling them the best of facts. And we'll get into that more in a minute, but I really want to make sure we nail down this concept of a classroom over a courtroom in conversation, because think about it. Even if you do prove someone substantially wrong, it will likely take some time for them to step away and process the implications of changing their view. So we shouldn't go into a debate expecting to get a complete confession and surrender. We should simply go in expecting to learn while helping others do the same. You may be thinking that, look, all I do is win-win-win all the time, right? It's not my fault if I get into a debate like I am going to win at the end of the day. And if that's you, good for you. Go be a lawyer. But understand that meaningful conversation, it wasn't just made for the courtroom. And shouting out, you can't handle the truth, well, that may make for some good movies, but not for good ongoing relationships. So practically, how can we take hold of this classroom over courtroom mentality? Well, the first thing to do is simply start with the 5 whys. Ask someone why 5 times in regard to aspects of one subject to help you both understand that viewpoint. Think about it. If you truly believe someone else's opinion is wrong, won't their explanation of a wrong idea eventually break down? You see, it is much easier to help someone else show themselves they're wrong than it is to try and tell them they're wrong. Let me say that one more time because this is so key for all aspects of life. It is much easier to help someone else show themselves they're wrong than it is to try and tell them they're wrong. In fact, Galileo once said that you can't teach a man anything. You can only help him learn something for himself. Now, hopefully by this point in the talk, you have that certain someone in mind who you know needs help to stay civil when discussing anything more controversial than whether or not pecan is actually pronounced pecan, right? And if you have that person in mind, just insert their name into the following example. I'll use the name Jimmy. But let's say, for instance, that you're talking about the weather with your good friend Jimmy, but it's a miserable day outside, so it's a short conversation. You try talking about sports, but you're both Georgia fans, so there's really not much to talk about this year either, right? You try discussing work and school, but neither of you want to think about those things when you don't have to, so you finally bring up the courage to mention, so, Jimmy, what do you think about the recent political elections? Oof, right? Let's say that, just for the sake of example, Jimmy is a strong communist, and you're not. After Jimmy expresses his communist ideology, if you're a capitalist, you could be tempted to say, Jimmy, that is an idiotic viewpoint. This is why capitalism is right, based on both history and logic. Now, what did you just do there? You instantly polarized the situation. You made it him versus you, and regardless of the arguments that you present to Jimmy, he will likely leave more set in his communist ways than ever. What if instead, Jimmy tells you he's a communist, and you ask him, why he believes that. Not sarcastically, not with your eyes rolling, but with genuine interest. He tells you, well, it's the view that makes the most sense to him. And you ask him why he feels it's best. He tells you the root of his belief, and now you know what to actually address in order to be able to change his mind. So, the next time you're faced with a potentially controversial subject, don't run away from it, but simply start with the 5 whys. Secondly, try and separate ideas from the people holding them. It is much easier to help someone else leave a viewpoint if they see it as a view they believe instead of their view. You see the difference there? Plus, if you have to point out flaws in a view, you don't want someone to feel that you're pointing out flaws in them. Let's go back to Jimmy. If in conversation you say, Jimmy, you communists believe, or communists like you have done, well, Jimmy must automatically defend whatever it is you accuse communism of just to defend himself. And you made it harder for him to separate himself from the view because you are attaching him to it. What if instead you tried, Jimmy, communism has a history of the following. Is that something that you agree with? Or, Jimmy, communists would argue this. Is that something that you agree with? By taking Jimmy's view and putting it at a distance, you allow him to more objectively address the belief for what it is and not just for what he believes it to be. So, let's review quickly. When in controversial conversation, the first thing we want to do is simply start with the 5 whys, right? And secondly, try and separate ideas from the people holding them. Finally, and my personal favorite and probably the most important, encourage others to play devil's advocate for themselves. Instead of you presenting an opposing view, even if it's your personal view, allow someone else, allow Jimmy to assess the opposing view with your help. But remember that you're both on the same team to pursue truth, right? And they're teaching you. So to present an opposing view when talking with someone else like Jimmy, be sure and use the third person. You can say something like, well, Jimmy, that's an interesting point. But some people, not me, right? Some people would argue that communism represents the following. Why do you think they believe that? Or you could say, Jimmy, I've heard it argued that communism represents the following. Can you help me understand why do you think they would say that? Right? By taking an opposing view and putting it in a third-person perspective, Jimmy can more objectively address the other side because he doesn't feel that he is competing against you. Now, using these techniques, encouraging you to ask why, to help others better understand their own belief, and trying to separate ideas from the people holding them, and finally encouraging others to play devil's advocate for themselves. Understand that you don't have to agree at the end of the conversation. In fact, if you do it right, you probably won't, at least not at first. But you should be able to walk away and respectfully disagree. So to wrap things up here, if we wish to grow as individuals, as a society, and as a human race, we must be willing to talk about things that matter. And consequently, we must be able to disagree respectfully. John F. Kennedy once said that too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. But growth, it is uncomfortable, right? It's not easy. Since when, though, is what's easiest what's best? The most important things to be discussed in this life, politics, religion, philosophy, sociology, ethics, these are what should consume our conversation, not be considered off limits. We are surrounded by an incomprehensible amount of knowledge each and every day in the form of people who have a lifetime of experiences and perspectives that are unique and different from ours. So I challenge each of us in the room today to use the opportunity of speaking with others to learn by gaining their opinion on controversial subjects. I think that Aristotle encapsulated my entire talk when he simply said that the mark of an educated mind is the ability to consider a matter without accepting it. Please remember that it is a good thing to disagree respectfully. So go address life's biggest issues, but do it in the setting of a classroom instead of a courtroom. Thank you.